In 2007, he was convicted of the crime. But the veteran police detective wasn't satisfied. He still felt a need to identify the victim.
Every time I look at the eyes, on that photograph, I see pain. If you look at the gaunt cheeks, the pallor of a long-term alcoholic or drug user, that's a homeless person. That's somebody who's been out in the rain. Somebody out there knows her, and I'm hoping that that's where my lead is going to come from, somebody who knew her. And if nothing else, just give me the next step in this journey of identifying her. All I know is I wouldn't want to be dumped here. She's nothing more than a piece of trash to him at that point. She's lost her value to him in any way, shape, or form. So hopefully we'll be able to identify her and bring some sense of closure to her family if she has any. And me as well.
Dr. Stone considers Jesperson's efforts to mock police and the court system and places him on the scale of evil.
In many ways, attention seekers are the most challenging criminals investigators must face. They quickly take investigators to their goal, confession, but it is only through diligent police work that the web of an attention seeker's lies can truly be unraveled. It may never be possible to know just how many victims Keith Jesperson truly killed. In placing him on my scale, I must consider the damage he does by simply claiming so many crimes. Keith Jesperson is a cold-blooded psychopathic schemer driven by a powerful need for attention. For his crimes and his numerous claims of others, I place him at level 18 on my scale, a level reserved for psychopaths preoccupied with murder.
In stark contrast to the eager confessions of Keith Jesperson, the identity of the infamous Black Dahlia murderer has stymied investigators for more than half a century. Los Angeles, January the 15th, 1947. A woman's naked corpse was found on a vacant property. The scene was shocking. The victim's face had been slashed from ear to ear, creating a hideous grin. Her body had been cut in half with surgical precision, her arms raised over her head and bent at 90-degree angles. She had been placed centimeters from the pavement, presumably to ensure her corpse would be easily discovered. Police had never seen anything like it.
They find a body that's perfectly bisected, cut in half. All the blood has been drained from the body. They see signs of torture. They see a careful posing of the body, not just dumped there or thrown there, but a careful and deliberate posing.
Investigators identified the victim, 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, a struggling actress. Police had few leads. During the ensuing months, the killer sent mock newspaper headlines and cryptic messages to the police, taunting them and the public. Investigators followed every clue, but could identify no solid suspects. The unsolved case came to be known as the Black Dahlia.
The Black Dahlia killer is an individual who's desperate for recognition. He wants credit for what he's done. But this is also an incredibly brutal scene, one that reveals torture and zero empathy for the victim. The murderer very likely has advanced medical training, given the nature of the wounds, and is clearly highly intelligent. Since the only evidence available to police is the information that the killer himself has chosen to reveal. The person responsible for this crime would easily occupy the highest reaches of my scale.
Steve Hodel was a boy living in Hollywood when Elizabeth Short's severed corpse was found. In 1963, when he joined the Los Angeles Police Department, the Black Dahlia was the most notorious unsolved murder in the city's history. The nature of Elizabeth Short's murder revealed much to the retired detective about the person responsible for such a killing.
Clearly, this is somebody that suffered extensive torture, maybe 2 or 3 hours. We noticed that this was a perfect bisection. There's only one way you can divide a body without going through the bone, and that's going through the second and third lumbar vertebrae. This was not a butcher or a meat cutter. This had to have been somebody highly skilled in medicine.
Following the death of his father, Dr. George Hodel, in 1999, Steve came across a black and white photo of a nude woman. His father had taken the photograph.
I looked at the photograph and I said, why does this face seem familiar to me? To this day, I don't know why, but the Black Dahlia comes to mind.
Steve believed the woman in the photo was Elizabeth Short, but he didn't know why his father would have an intimate photograph of the Black Dahlia.
I started researching the investigation and looking into it because I really knew nothing, even though I'd been with LAPD and this was their most famous unsolved case. And I discovered that somebody with surgical skill had committed the crime. And I thought, interesting, Dad had surgical skill, but it still never occurred to me that he might be the suspect.
Steve Hodel wondered how his father knew Elizabeth Short and whether he'd had any information about the Black Dahlia murder. The detective dug deeper into his father's past. George Hodel was a gifted child full of promise. By the age of 9, he was recognized as a piano prodigy. He was also considered to have a genius-level IQ. Young George Hodel became engrossed by art, but also by sex and violence. Although he thought of himself as a writer and photographer, he was never recognized for those talents. He became obsessed with the dark, dangerous side of Los Angeles. At the age of 17, George found work as a crime reporter for a newspaper, writing gruesome accounts of Los Angeles murder scenes. The violence seemed to excite him.
Oftentimes, genius comes with emotional instability. That, paired with George's precocious obsession with violence, creates a dangerous combination.
George Hodel eventually became a doctor. By day, he ran a clinic specializing in sexually transmitted diseases, making him privy to the secrets of Hollywood studio moguls and celebrities. At night, he hosted decadent parties where the Hollywood elite indulged in drugs and beautiful women.
All of these amazing people coming and partying and drinking and having a wonderful time. Henry Miller, Man Ray, John Huston.
It was at one of these Hollywood parties that George Hodel apparently met Elizabeth Short. Steve believes his father and Short had a sexual affair. As he continued to investigate the Black Dahlia case, Steve identified other connections his father had to the murder. Dr. George Hodel had surgical training and a background in journalism.
My God, this can't be. There is the possibility.
Steve Hodel was convinced that he had not only solved the Black Dahlia case, but that he also understood the motivation behind this most twisted of murders.
He actually completed a masterpiece of surrealism. He created something that he knew would live forever.
Hoping to achieve new insight into the minds of murderers, Dr. Michael Stone is examining how police and investigators identify killers. In some cases, like that of the notorious Black Dahlia, the murderer remains unknown, even after more than 6 decades. Retired Los Angeles police detective Steve Hodel became convinced that the man responsible for the Black Dahlia murder was none other than his father, Dr. George Hodel.
The key is that a hemicorpectomy was performed on Elizabeth Short. It's only by going through the second and third lumbar vertebrae can you perform this operation.
Steve reviewed his father's medical school records and discovered he had performed more than 700 hours of surgery.
So clearly he was highly skilled in surgery and had the ability to bisect a body.
Steve also perceived his father's touch on the anonymous postcards that taunted the police through the newspapers.
What do we have here? We have headlines. He's sending in headlines. This is not some thug off the street. This is somebody trained in journalism.
George's experience as a young newspaper reporter was another link to the murders for Steve.
It was a journalist. It was a journalist killer.
But his father's infatuation with surrealist art and his desire to be recognized as an artist provided perhaps the most powerful clue for Steve Hodel.
The key to understanding the Black Dahlia murder is surrealism. He always saw himself as a surrealist. He believed that there was no difference between the dream and the waking state. Where others intellectually believed this surrealist, he actually truly believed it in his heart of hearts. If you go there, that's a very dangerous position to be in because it basically opens you up to just about anything. There are no rules. There is no morality. There is no God.
The surrealist artist Man Ray and George Hodel had been friends. Man Ray's art seems to have influenced George and the Black Dahlia killer.
I reviewed the crime scene photos initially, and they bothered me. The deliberate posing. What was I seeing here? What was the killer trying to say? I started reviewing Man Ray's photographs. A lot of them depicted decapitations, segmented bodies, and one of his most famous photographs is called the Minotaur. And this is a woman's body, bisected at the waist, and the hands are posed in this position to represent the horns. This is a bull. The Minotaur, of course, was the half-man, half-bull of Crete, who devoured young maidens and was kept alive in the labyrinth.
Elizabeth Short's perfectly bisected body, the deliberate posing of the figure, the grotesque gash carved across her mouth. Steve Hodel is convinced that his father George saw this as some sort of perverse work of art.
He actually completed a masterpiece of surrealism. Elizabeth Short's body was his canvas. His scalpel was his paintbrush. He created something that he knew would live forever.
After a 7-year investigation, Steve presented his evidence to the authorities.
I go in secret and I take all of my evidence to an active head deputy district attorney. He says, based on what you've brought to me and based on the photographs and based on the evidence, and were your father still alive, I would seek the death penalty.
But Hodel says the murder of Elizabeth Short will remain officially unsolved.
All of these reports have been sanitized from the LAPD, and they've all disappeared. Not only have all of the transcripts and all of the information on George Hodel disappeared, but so has all of the physical evidence. Potential linkage to DNA, it's all vanished. LAPD has no explanation for it. All they say is, well, sometimes stuff happens.
Steve Hodel believes that evidence in the Black Dahlia case file was destroyed to protect his father. Dr. George Hodel's clinic may have furnished him with secrets of the Hollywood elite that granted him powerful connections. Without the complete case file, it may well be difficult to prove that George Hodel was the Black Dahlia killer. His son, retired detective Steve Hodel, has no doubts. Dr. Stone considers the case.
The Black Dahlia crime was incredibly gruesome. There was torture and there was exhibitionism. Clearly, the killer had great skill and intelligence. George Hodel was a deeply disturbed man who, although brilliant, had a viciously distorted sense of reality. There's great reason to believe George Hodel would be capable of such a crime. If Steve is correct, I would place George Hodel at the very top of my scale. Level 22, psychopathic torture murderers with torture their primary motive.
Investigators in pursuit of evil, tracking killers on the run. They must attempt to unravel the desires and motivations of these murderers in their efforts to prevent further acts of violence. Dr. Stone will continue to study their techniques in his quest to understand those among us who are considered to be